my screen. All right, here we go. All right. Hopefully you guys will see in front of you a screen that says tiny URL. Do you see that, everybody? All right, perfect. Okay, great. So like I was mentioning, this is the link. You have that. Lisa will periodically put that into the chat feed so it doesn't get lost, just so you can have it as a constant reminder and scoop it out when you need to. Okay, so we're going to start with something I call the 5 basics. Now, many of you might be familiar with slides. I'm not sure. As you know, slides is pretty similar to PowerPoint, works in the Google world, right, which is where we are right now. But there are some features and some functionality in Google Slides that I want to make sure that you are really proficient in or have a good understanding. They are easy, but just so that you're fully aware, because those pieces of these 5 basics are what will really help in moving through the larger theme of the whole workshop, is how to use that one feature of background on a slide to enhance and supplement and be a little bit more creative in your lessons, and do some things that you might be struggling with or need some assistance with, or to make easier for you and your students. So there's 5 things I just want to make sure that we are really proficient with and that you're comfortable with before we jump into some exemplars of how to use the backgrounds in primarily in ELA and math, but across content areas. So the first thing I want to talk about is background color. Really simple concept. Just want to make sure everyone knows how to do it. So I'm going to move to a blank slide. And just so you're comfortable, up here, there's a button called background. You want to click on that. That enables you to do some things to the background of that slide. So simply by coming over here and changing the color, I have an ability to now redo the background of a particular slide. Simple, quick, easy. You might be thinking it's really no big deal, but we have seen slides used a lot of different ways. It often is used as a presentation software. Maybe you're delivering your notes to students that way. Maybe you want students to create a presentation, but we've also seen many classroom application uses where a teacher will create a full presentation, but with mixed activities on each slide, and share that whole Google slide presentation and have kids co-author and co-create on various slides at the same time. So a teacher weaves in and out of that one presentation, and kids are jumping on their particular slide. So just by enabling something simple as changing the background color of a particular slide could enable some organizational aid to your lesson. You know, Billy and Mikey, you guys work on slide blue, and Tammy and Maria, you guys work on pink slide, and so forth. So as a teacher, you know where to go if you need to give some help to particular students, and students know where to go when they're working on one piece of the task or a particular activity that they need to accomplish on that task. So just switching up the background could help a lot without changing anything, without changing, you still have the layout options that can layer on top of it, but just changing the background might help. And the other thing when changing the color of the background is it could lend itself to a little bit more creativity on your end. Instead of using those pre-formatted templates, depending on how often you are using Google Slides and the ways you are using it, that could be redundant because they only give you a selection of slides. And unless you're downloading continual free ones, this might be a quick, easy way for you to create your own. You know, we're constantly competing with Teacher Pay Teacher. They have some beautiful things over there. The rigor might not be there for what we want, but aesthetically, it does really look cool, especially when you start looking at the way they are using color and thickness of line and incorporating style and clip art. So here's my version of that, right? So on this Bitmoji craze, I know everybody's using Bitmojis now within the Google platform. You can simply download that through Google Extensions, which John Escalera showed me quickly the other day. And I pulled out the Bitmoji, it's synced, I found out, logged in, and that's my attempt at my Bitmoji. So I was able to now customize this particular slide, or as I'm going to show you today, I can create this as a full background into the backdrop of any of my slides or presentations or tests that I'm using. And all I did simply here was infuse a little clip art of the Bitmoji, change up the font size, and change thickness, and I created a virtual whiteboard where kids can now come on here and write in, but all of the rest of this could remain frozen in the backdrop, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So color does make a difference. You know, it could add some aesthetic appeal, but can also be an organizational aid to help kids and to guide kids and yourself when you're working with multiple slides or multiple tasks. So I just want to make sure you know how to change the color. The other thing is I want to make sure that you know how not only is it color, but you can also push a background image into the slide. Again, something pretty simple. Just want to make sure you're comfortable with it. Go to that same button, background, but this time instead of choosing color, I'm going to choose an image. And you have a lot of options, a lot of places you can pull images from. We will be dealing with the first one, upload, and the last one, Google image search. That's what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to push over into Google image search. These others are self-explanatory, where you can pull images from your camera or from a designated URL or site or that exists in your Google Drive, and those are pretty straightforward, as is this one. So I'm just going to show you a Google image search. I'm just going to type in the word lighthouse. I love this picture, let's say, hit insert, and now that picture is embedded into the backdrop of that Google slide. Again, you can prove that by going over, and the layout still layers on top of it. So again, now hopefully you're starting to see that you can start customizing some of your assignments and your tasks, if for no other reason but for aesthetics, creativity, alignment, but it just brings a different edge to the presentation. But all I want to make sure you understand is I can grab a picture and push it way into the back of that slide. All right, so if you're comfortable with that, I'm going to move on and show you 3 other pieces. One is clip art formatting. I want to make sure you're okay with that too. That is a very simple tool, but there are some features on the side that I want to make sure you're comfortable with. I'm going to go to another blank slide. If I want to push in an image onto this slide, all I simply do is come up here right below background basics, this little word I have here. I go to insert image, and I am going to search the web. If I come over here, I can add in what I want. I'm on a puppy kick right now, I don't know why. I'm going to put free clip art puppies, and let me grab this guy and push him into my slide. Nothing new there. Hopefully you all know how to do that. Come over, and I'm good. I can move them all around, put them wherever I want. But what I want to show you is some other quick features. While I have the clip art selected, I can come up to format options. Format options opens a right-hand side window that enables me to do very specific things to that particular clip art image. So what I want to talk about are 2 here. First is size and rotation. You can, by clicking that arrow there, it opens up some features for playing with the size and the rotation of that clip art. You can do a lot with scaling and height and width and the dimensions of that clip art. You can play with all that, but I just want to make sure that you see that down here with these 2 functions, by clicking on that, I can change the orientation or the direction of the image as well, right? So by flipping it, I can flip him from left to right, or I can rotate him all around. That becomes a little bit more important in the next part of what we're going to do. The other piece I want to show you while I'm in here is color, recoloring or coloring that image if you're not really comfortable with this color format. So for example, I could take this image. Let me just make a quick copy of this puppy. Okay. And so now I have 2 puppies here. This particular puppy I want to make look a little different. So if I come over to recolor, and this drop down, it starts with no recolor, which means that's how the image is, but you have options. If I pull that down, I could change the color of that image to whatever I want it to be in this collection, right? Or I could pull out the color, which again is going to become more important as I show you some creative ideas to do and use that feature. So now I have two puppies. If I push this puppy on top of this guy, you see that one is in front of the other. The brown puppy is sitting in front of the white one. If I want to push one of them into the background or push one of them into the foreground, I select the image. I'm going to push this background, this brown puppy behind the white one. So I simply make sure it's selected, come up here to arrange and order, and I can send it to the back. You see what I did? I just pushed it behind. So that idea of arranging, pushing forward or backward images and layering on top of one another, easy enough concept, and it will play out as we move into the activities I structured later. Okay, so pretty easy, pretty straightforward. The next quick feature I want to show you is how to create your own background with screenshots. Hopefully you're comfortable and familiar with screenshotting simply by that 3-click simultaneous command of Shift Command and number 4. You will be able to take a picture and then that picture will be sent onto your desktop. That's pretty important in what we're going to do next so that you're comfortable with creating your own background for the slide. So I'm going to go to a blank slide. I'm just simply going to incorporate quickly some of the tips and tricks I just showed you. So I'm going to go to background. I'm going to change the background color to blue. Wow, that's pretty deep. So while I'm on here, I'm going to come down to gradient, over to gradient, and I'll choose this version of blue. That looks more like a sky. I like that, it's good. I'm going to insert a picture on here. I'm going to search the web. Instead of puppies, I'm going to put airplane. Great, I love this airplane. I'm going to stick that into the slide. Perfect. I may move it around a little bit. Maybe I want one more plane. I'm going to make a copy, pull that down a little bit. The only difference is I don't want him flying in this direction. So while I'm on the image, I'm going to pull up the format options. I'm going to look at size and rotation and flip him so the plane's flying the other way. And also while I'm over here, I think I'll change the color because I want two different distinct color planes. Okay, everything looks great. Right now though, the only thing that's in the background of this slide is the sky. These pieces are moving all over the place. If I want this entire scene to fold into the background, I can do that very easily by taking a screenshot. So simply by doing Shift Command 4, it pulls up this little X of measurement. I come to the very left-hand corner of my screen, and whatever I want to capture, which would be this whole slide, I hold down my mouse and stretch across the entire slide and release. Hopefully you heard the camera shot. That's sitting in the background. That picture is pushed into my desktop right now, and let me show you how to grab it. So I'm going to enter in with a brand new screen. Now I want to push that picture that I took into the background. So use the same protocol. I go to background and I go to image and choose image. And just as I did a Google search and pulled an image that sits here, I could also pull it from my desktop by simply coming over to upload. It gives me an option that I could browse and I can look all over my computer for it, or simply drag the file over here. Now remember, I took that picture, so it's sitting on my desktop. Here it is. I'm going to drag that picture, once I can grab it, and I'm going to drag it right onto that box, that white box, and I'm done. Now what it did was it pushed that into the background, the whole screen. I can no longer grab either plane to prove it, and if I go to layout, you see that all of those boxes layer on top. Now that's a particularly helpful screen, hopefully that a technique that you I've got down pat, simple enough, very straightforward. And the very last technique I want to show you is page setup. If you've ever tried to print out Google Slides or a presentation, sometimes it comes out a little wonky, right? Because the dimensions of a slide that you're working with, this slide is very different than the copy paper that you're putting in the printer. So I want to make sure that you're very comfortable with knowing how to change the page setup of a Google slide simply by going over to File, Page Setup. It defaults to what the standard dimensions are of a Google slide, but if I use that drop down and come to custom, I can change the dimensions of that slide to look very similar to an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And if I apply it, suddenly my Google slide looks exactly like a sheet of paper. Notice it will do that to the entire presentation, so just be mindful of that. But that's an important skill and technique you need for the next step of what we're going to cover. So hopefully we're good, and those 5 quick features, functionality of slides you're comfortable with. And I'm going to move on to now looking at how to apply those techniques together to create some functionality for you and to offer some advice or suggestion for ELA and math application. Okay, so let's move over into this first really big idea as terms of making things interactive. So one huge area that we all have been doing, regardless of the content we teach, is this idea of annotation, close reading strategies, marking text, having kids interact or highlight or pull out particular content. Now, when you do that in the Word, on a doc rather, some of that functionality is easy, but if you wanted to infuse, let's say, clip art or text boxes on top of the text, it gets a little wonky, and sometimes it disrupts the text and moves things around, and we don't want to do that. So let me show you a quick workaround for that. First thing you want to do in this scenario is just change the page setup to be that 8.5 by 11, because we'll need to work in that frame. Doesn't have to be all the time, but depending on what you want to push into the background, you may need to have it this way. So I'm going to now create a nice blank page that looks exactly like an 8.5 by 11. And the other thing I want to do now is take a PDF of a particular chunk of text or an essay, because I know we do that a lot, right? When we are handing out materials, we hand out 8.5 by 11 graphic organizers. We may give them a photocopied selection of a text, give it to them, the kids mark it up with their pens, put Post-its on it, color on top of it, right? So we're trying to recreate that in the virtual world. So if you want to share out a selected text to your kids and have them mark it up, here's one way you could do it, particularly if you have those 8.5 by 11 saved as PDFs already, right? So for example, in trying to collect some of the text, I went to where we're all comfortable, and is the New Jersey Digital Library, right? This happens to be quickly for grade 5. I want to work with text. If I don't have a PDF ready, but I want to share it out with the kids and not cause massive disruption on their end, I simply go into one of these released items. All I did was simply come in here. This happened to be an informational text on pandas. I just simply highlighted, dragged down all the way, took the whole piece, made a photocopy, made a copy rather, and dumped it into a Word document. So it looks pretty similar to this. Let's pretend for a moment this is a Word document, right? If I have this in Word, and I want to make it a PDF, I can resave this and push this out as a PDF or as a JPEG, which would be most helpful. But if I don't, I use that 3-click feature of Shift-Command-4, come up to the corner, drag across the entire screen. Notice that it's already set an 8.5 by 11, and take a picture. Now I go back to the same functionality as I did when I was building or uploading for the Lighthouse. Instead of me choosing what they have in a bank of collected clip art, I'm going to pull it from my desktop, much like I did when I created a picture with the airplane scene. So now I come to this screen. I am ready to find that picture I took that's sitting on my desktop. I go to choose image, upload. Now it's ready to collect it. I'm going to move my screen over a little bit. Great. Here's my essay that I copied, took a picture of. I dump it, and I'm done. Now the entire essay is pushed into the background of this slide. So now I can do a whole bunch of things on top of this particular slide that now has the essay sitting in the background. So I can start to do things like this, right? I can annotate, but I can annotate it a little bit more creatively. Instead of the standard circle, underline, exclamation point, question mark, some of those annotation marks that we have been using, which are fine, here's an opportunity to be a little bit more creative. Maybe, depending on what that informational text is about, you might want to have your kids create their own icon or their own legend of annotation marks. You know, for example, I chose this quick little panda. You can give these to the kids, or you can have them be a little bit creative and asking them to find or demonstrate their aha moments or their connections, or perhaps they found powerful vocabulary, so they want to instead incorporate some sort of annotation mark like this. Maybe the panda could be for really high quality, strong evidence that relates to the claim in an evaluation moment. All of that can now be easily done because the text is sitting in the background. So I can easily move all over this screen without disrupting the text. So that takes that piece away, that confusion or that additional frustration. I could also do this kind of highlighting. Normally, when we're working with a Word document, kids can go in, use the highlighting feature, and they just move right across the text. But because this text is embedded in the background of the slide, that feature is not available. So we have a quick workaround for that too. All I can do is simply come over to insert. Instead of an image this time, I come down to a shape, come over and pull that rectangle. And if I wanted to, for whatever reason, highlight this second sentence, I pull across and now it's highlighted. But as you can tell, I can't see through that. So I can change the color of that particular box by coming over to the fill color, the paint can, dropping down, changing it to red. Still can't see through it. So what I can do is make that color transparent. So on that same click of the paint can, I can come down to custom and I can move this toggle bar down and start releasing or saturating the color. Hit OK, and now you can see, I can see right through that particular bar. And then I can take that and copy that multiple times and move all the red around. Let's say if you had your own particular color coding system you wanted the kids to use, green for, you know, maybe the main idea, blue for development of a thesis or a particular evidence or whatever you're going to do in color coding. But you see how it can play out very easily. Now you can teach your kids that and have them do that on their own, or before pushing this out to the entire class, you could simply put 3 colored bars right across the top, and then they can just copy and paste off of that as they go. So you can accomplish annotation, but it might be a little bit more creative and a little easier by pushing the entire text into the background, okay? So another spin on that, also too, maybe you want to have the text chunked and have various kids work on various chunks of text for whatever reason. So you can take a screenshot of each paragraph or a collection of paragraphs and just push that into the background of a particular slide and have kids and share that presentation and have kids work on that slide. In this particular case, if they were exploring vocabulary words, the word happened to be range, you could have them search for words that or sentences from the article that help the reader understand, and they can highlight and annotate all of that. This might help also if you're dealing with specialized populations where the text could be overwhelming at first, and now you can chunk and gradually release it to students and work together or pair up and work on it. And there's lots of variations. But again, pushing it into the background allows for kids to overlap and move on top of it without ever disrupting that particular text at all. So another option, which is along the same lines, is that we've heard time and time again that I have these great graphic organizers that I love, but they're PDFs, and usually I print them out and hand them to the kids. But I want the kids to be able to write on them like they used to do when they were in centers or in stations, or as a, independently when I would have them work with a chunk of material. So here's a way to do that as well. Same concepts though, right? So I'm going to come up here. Here's my collection of graphic organizers. They happen to exist also in the curriculum, but I find I think one works really well. Perhaps it's this one here, this inference sheet, for whatever reason. So what I can do is the same concept. I can do this in two ways, actually. I can take the PDF and download it onto my desktop, and when I open it, it'll open up in Preview. Preview will enable you to then export it very simply into a JPEG. And that's what we're using every time we take a screenshot anyway, is we're pushing it into a JPEG format onto the desktop and dragging it back in. So two solutions here. You can open it up in Preview, and I'll show you what that looks like really, really quickly. Here's a particular PDF I have already on my desktop, and I'm already in Preview. I could simply come over to File and Export, and that'll take this entire PDF and give me some options of ways to export it onto my desktop. And you see you have two options here. The difference between the two is a resolution, so you can play with which one is clearer after you export it. And all I would simply do is select JPEG or JPEG 2000, hit save, and it'll export out onto my desktop. Okay, I'm going to cancel that for now. I'm going to show you the other way, which may be easier for you, is simply by using, again, the screenshot. I take a picture, Shift-Command-4, of this entire worksheet or this graphic organizer. Pull it down from corner to corner. I release, and now the computer took a picture of that graphic organizer and sent it to my desktop. So now if I come back to that particular screen I was on, which is right here, I can now go to background, choose an image. The screen is set for me to drag it on top. Let me find where it is. Here it is right here. I drag it on top. And now I've embedded that graphic organizer into the background of that slide. But now I can simply add over it anything I want the kids to write on. Insert text box, and I can now pull into these boxes, because it's sitting in the backdrop, a text box for kids to write on without moving any of these pieces. So now I've enabled this to become interactive. And I can change the color of that particular box too, right? In case I wanted to say, okay, boys and girls, make sure you fill out all of the orange text boxes. Or I can write in here to start them, type here, right? Doesn't matter. And I can do that and pre-fill all of the text boxes in, or not. I could simply tell the kids, show them how to do the text box overlap, and then they could do it as well. And then I can push it out if I was doing it for them. Okay, here's another example of what I did there. But using color coding might help in organizational flow, directions, giving a sequence of steps, or maybe if you have kids working simultaneously on a document or in collaboration or in teams virtually, you might use some coloring of those text boxes to kind of guide what you want them to do, or a procession or a sequence of steps in completing it. But now the functionality of a PDF becomes much more interactive by simply pushing it into the background of Google Slides. Now, some of this you might say, well, why aren't we using Word doc? Well, you can do a lot more creative pieces in Google Slides because of the nature of it being a presentation app. It will allow the functionality of some of those things a lot easier and without disruption. Okay, so that's one big, gigantic, hopefully helpful solution for you in making some of your documents, particularly your PDFs, much more interactive. So now I'm going to jump into a little bit more content-specific pieces and ways to combine some of those features together. And I will start with math, but understand that whether I'm playing in math or the ELA content, any of these techniques or functionality of the features of Google Slides and backgrounds can be applied across the board. So keep that in mind as you're moving through and thinking about ways you can use it tailored to your particular lessons or the content you teach. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to jump into the presentation and talk about math a little bit. We started off the workshop by saying, we're coming into some really beautiful weather. It's going to be hard to keep the kids engaged. You want your lessons to be a little bit more creative, interactive, both for the kids and you. So that's the drive behind what we talk about now in this bank of activities, lessons, tasks for ELA and math. Looking at these moments to supplement virtual school as we move through weeks, or in the upcoming weeks, 9 through 13, getting us to the end, looking at substitution opportunities, ways that you can mix it up a little bit, and then hopefully with an idea of using some of this in the future when we get back, okay? So keeping that in mind and coming from really a PBL perspective, I started thinking about ways that we can use the features of Google Slides and backgrounds to create some creative math tasks. So here's one. We know that in Union City, the mayor is very big on creating these parks in the most ingenious ways throughout the city, in the tiniest lots, and they're all over the place to try to make really good, enjoyable moments for our kids in an urban setting, right? So kind of a take on that. All I did was create this initial slide, start presenting the scenario where the mayor, instead of going to his normal bank of architects, he's asking for students to submit competitive plans instead, start giving some math conditions. In this case, the lot size, 40,000 feet by 20,000 feet. So I'm starting to gear up towards, as you can tell, some area, some perimeter work, measurement, capacity, dimensions, all of this kind of math areas and standards are starting to gear up. And what I'm going to do is ask them to submit a floor plan of what their park would look like. So I start layering in some math conditions, right? 50% of the entire surface or the grass area needs to be covered by patio bricks, some addition non-negotiables of what it must have. I start adding in budget concerns, and 40% of the budget should be dedicated to this, 30% to this, 10 to this, however you design it. Giving some smaller dimensions to patio bricks, giving a collection of pricing on the side, so I can do a lot with algebra and equation, and talking about how I'm using algebra to obtain total prices or individual prices for collections of things, right? So you just start layering in math, and I'm sure the math people in the group are thinking of a ton of different, much more in-depth conditions that would layer on top. But just to give you a feel for it, that the kids are going to create something based on your set of design and more than that, math conditions. So where are they going to do this? What are they going to do? So I have then created this format for them. And all I did was take a Google slide, very simply, color changed to green, added some fencing and shrubbery clip art along the bottom. I did a little gate very quickly, but this now becomes the background of that slide. So I took a screenshot. Once I created it, I took a screenshot and pushed the whole thing into the background of this slide. So kids are going to use this and layer on top of it based on the math conditions that I gave them. And I also give them a collection of clip art. And this isn't meant to be exhaustive by any shape, and nor did I chunk these together. These were random selection of items that you would normally find in a park or a backyard. And because I showed you before, I had to change the coloring and size and orientation of the clip art, you can easily do this, maybe by choosing one or two variations, but just changing the color and the orientation so they look and feel a little differently. So giving them the math conditions and the scenario and giving them all the clip art to choose, then they're off to create their own version. So here's what I did as a sample. It was very therapeutic. I keep saying this as I go through these lessons and these workshops, that it was, it allowed me to be a little bit creative and designing. Obviously, I didn't adhere by any means to my own conditions, but this is just to give you a visual of what it would look like. But kids will come up with amazing design elements. And you can simply add an additional slide where they are showing and explaining all of the math behind their design. You can take it a step further and you can have competitions within your classroom of which design would win the proposal, requested by the mayor, all sorts of things you can do here, but just a way to mix in some number sense, possibly, and some measurements and algebraic thinking into a PBL that might support some of the math that you have coming up, or if you want to take a little bit of a brain break from some of the heavy duty math you're doing and just give some sort of PBL like this, allows the kids to have a little creativity but still remaining in the math world. And the same thing in the same venue, I started thinking about other ways you can do things that are similar. So maybe, for example, you are commissioned by the New York City Aquarium in Coney Island. They want you to design a tropical fish tank, or maybe this can be a fish tank in your home. Give them some math conditions, layer it out for them and what they have to do. Give them a collection of tropical fish, and all I did, and sea anemones and seaweeds and rocks, and together can put together their own design or scene. This is something I came up with. You notice that I used some of the same clip art, but changed the color and the size and the orientation. The rocks are layered in front of one another, so I go back to that technique of how to play with the clip art a little bit. And you can do a whole bunch of math in certain tropical fish are much more expensive than others, and you can layer in pricing with this and sort of look at the percent of how much the tank should be devoted to different kinds of sea life because of the ecosystem requirements and predator-prey relationships. All of that can come into something like this as well, but you can layer in the math and allow the kids some choice in design. And the same thing here too. All I did was took a clip art of a room, pushed it into the background, same concept, give them a whole bunch of stuff to fill the room, and then let them go based on the math conditions. This is my version of it. And I've also been saying, you can tell that I've been watching, in addition to Netflix binging, I've been watching a whole bunch of HGTV shows, DIY, The Cooking Channel, Insane Pools, all this kind of home improvement, kind of creative things, which is probably influencing his activities. So, but you notice too that I played with the color and the design. You can do a lot here as well, beyond just budgeting and algebra. You can do a lot of tiling and perimeter and area work and measurement and all of those things combined. And then I started thinking, well, what about this scenario where you're hired as a general contractor, and this customer wants to resurface the front of their home. Same thing, I give them a couple of quick tools, some brick or stonework, what I'm calling a piece of wood, and what I'm classifying as a brick, and then kids can cover over this because I pushed that entire front image of the home into the background, and then kids can layer on top. And that can be all sorts of conditions here mathematically, what the customer wants and likes, and then you could have a competition there and see which facade works the best. Even with food, and here comes the Cooking Network influence and baker challenges, which I love. So all I did here was took a background drop of a bakery, pushed it into the background after layering on top of it a clip art of a cake stand. I went into shapes, like the shapes I use for highlighting, put them on top of by using the pull to the background feature, and I layered and created this cake, and then took a screenshot, pushed the whole thing into the background, and now I can give kids some geometry, some shapes, some measurement. You can even mix in, if they're decorating, how long it would take to create, so you can do some time intervals and things like that, and push in and have them, based on a set of math criteria, design their own cake. This happens to be the cake I designed. Again, moving forward, if you want to get really, really heavy in the math and just stick to some of the tools and practices you're used to in the classroom, I can use a balance scale right here. Found that clip art, took that orange header, pushed that whole scene into the background, and I can have kids with these particular shapes, which are the algebra blocks, show some balancing of equations, right? So they could show the modeled math of that equation on the left, and then on the right, they could solve and show and explain the solution process. Same thing for an equation mat, right? This could be a nightmare if I gave this to kids in Word. That equal sign and those lines would move all over the place. But if I set it up one time, take a screenshot, push it into the backdrop, and have kids use those same tools, I could have them do stuff like this and model out simple one-step equations in this particular case, right? And show the modeling, which we're pushing very largely. It's heavy on the NJSLA, and it's also what we're pushing in Conquer Math. So this idea of working with virtual manipulatives in activities can work as well. And hopefully those of you in math can start seeing that, you know, it doesn't have to be the balance scale. It could be a coordinate grid. So you can do a whole bunch of work with slopes and transformations and coordinate grid work, and you can do a whole bunch of things, right, if you push what you want to not move into the background. So those are just some quick ideas for using some of those tips and tricks in math world. In ELA world, we're going to do a little bit of the same take. However, here, I think what's most powerful is the ability to use images and push those images into the background. A little different swing on what we were just going through mathematically with relying heavily on clip art, but the images, I think, can really serve in a lot of ways to support the literacy skill attack you're doing and to help support and scaffold writing opportunities. So here's a quick activity in terms of imagery. So we want the kids to be real descriptive, right? We want them to rely on their senses and kind of draw from that. We could show mentor texts of writers who use imagery really well. We want our kids to be able to write really descriptively. So here's a quick way, quick lesson, quick support in that mindset. So all I did here was take a quick version or inspiration from The Lion, the Witch, the Wardrobe. This idea that if I open up that wardrobe, I'm going and being transported into another world. So here I just create a quick scenario. Miguel is in his bedroom. It's at midnight. He sees a strange light pouring from the keyhole of his closet. He gets excited. He knows he's going on another journey. Picks up his journal, runs to the door, opens the doorknob, and boom, he's transported. But to create this initial setup for that activity, all I did was just take a Google image of a keyhole, pushed it into the background, and layered right on top of that in the text box with white text so it popped. And now when I open that door, because I have access to beautiful fantasy-based images, they can lend themselves where kids can simply come right on top of the picture and open a text box and feel that there's a sense of immersion into the picture. So now what do I feel? What am I seeing? What am I smelling? What am I hearing and touching? All of that becomes a little bit more real and applicable to the writer as they are sitting on top of or within the picture. Instead of toggling between applications, going out, opening a picture, coming back to a blank white screen, here's a different take on that. So I can start writing right on top of this screen. And there's all sorts of beautiful images that you have accessible to you that really lend themselves nicely to the senses, which is what I wanted to evoke in this particular task. And all I simply did was put in the word fantasy clip art, I believe, or fantasy images, and I was instantly given a ton of pictures that I stayed on here for a while, and I just, wow, that's a cool one, and that's a cool one, and let me take that one. And also, some of this might be relatable to the kids in some of the video game that they do, and so there might be some relatability here as well. But just some real unique photo support and particularly this one. I thought this one was really cool too. And this is where I said, okay, I got to stop because I'll spend like hours on picking these really cool pictures. So, but you can just write so much here. And the fact that I can do that right on top of the picture helps with some of the idea flow and gives a sense that the kid is immersed within the photo so he can draw upon those experiences in his writing or her writing. Okay. So speaking of narrative writing, it's along the same lines. We don't do a whole lot of independent creative narrative writing. We might do that now, right? And play a little bit with that now, but they are asked to explore a narrative piece of writing and change an ending or change a scene or do some work with that text. It jumps from the text, but here might be an opportunity for you to rehearse some of those core elements of story elements. You know, the epic hero's journey, some of those larger writing themes that exist in this genre, or just discussing characterization or plot, climaxing and a turn in the plot, and problem resolution or solution scenarios, all of those story elements that exist. You might be able to rehearse in this kind of way. Maybe you build a sort of like a template or a background for them, and they add to what they're seeing to help them along the way. You could build a narrative story through photos, the way I'm going to show you, and have the kids just write right on top of that photo so that they get used to working with different kinds of story elements and developing a story from beginning to end. The story I'm going to show you that I created is really primary and wrapped around a primary approach, but it serves its purpose for demonstration, which is what I wanted to show. So you get a feel for what that looks like. As I said before, I'm on a puppy kick. I don't know why. So here would be a typical title slide for that story about puppies. All I did was push the puppy into the background, full image, and opens up a white text box on top of it. Here's where a kid could put the title or whatever and start the story. But I'm going to retell the story as the way I envisioned it told, with the photo supporting. Notice here's mom and puppy. We're sleeping. We're nice. We're home. We're safe. Down the bottom, there's a whole white text box on each of these photos where kids can now add in the text to support that picture. Mom gets up. She realizes something's wrong. I don't know what's going on. She looks. Oh my God, there's a hole in the fence. My puppy got out. I don't know where she is. I'm looking through the fence. Where's my puppy? Oh my God, I can't find her. I'm very upset. So now you can start doing a lot with inner thoughts, motivation, dialogue, emotional writing, right? Let me go. Did you see my puppy, best friend? I don't know. I didn't see her. How about you, best friend? Did you see my puppy? She's gone. I'm just worried, sick now. I can't find her. What am I going to do? Meanwhile, Puppy is playing beautifully in the field. She's having a great old time. Mom thinks, well, wait, let me go check down by the river. I know that she loves to play in the river. Let me call to her, see if she responds, if she's anywhere around the river. Wait a minute, I think I heard her. Not sure. Yep, I know I heard her bark. Wait, was that my mom? I know I heard my mom. I should not be outside of the yard. Let me start running back. Let me quickly run back, make sure baby Puppy's there. Let me look, the fence, go back through that hole in the fence. Oh my God, there's my baby. She made it home perfectly. Bad puppy, bad, bad puppy. You better stay with me forever. So, of course, this is a very simplistic version of a story told through photos. And you can sophisticate the photos if you wanted kids to just write about particular scenes, settings, or create a mini version of this. And you can sophisticate the selection by simply putting in really good words like abandoned, or sometimes you could put in scary, and you will get amazing scenes back. We don't want to make it all macabre and scary, obviously, but the plethora of time life photos that are available to you are amazing. So you should take advantage of that maybe, and have kids rehearse some of those narrative elements by simply having the photo to support their writing somewhere on that picture, on that page. So that was one idea for narrative writing. Another one is characterization and developing characterization through a number of places, right? So we talk about inner thoughts, and that's how an author often reveals and moves plot along and moves events in the story. What is the character thinking inside his head? Well, you can practice some of that. What is this character thinking as he's crossing the finish line? You simply can add a thought bubble. You can have multiple kids add thought bubbles, and then you can draw larger theme ideas or concepts from that about self-esteem, perseverance, a sense of accomplishment. All sorts of things can be pulled as a result of his inner thoughts as you add text boxes right on top of the photo. You know, what is this guy thinking about right now? What's in his head as he looks out at that sunset at that time? Is he troubled? Is he concerned? Or is he just thinking fondly back about some event in his life? What is grandpa thinking as he looks lovingly at his child? Is it, you know, a sense of nostalgia, a sense of where his family is now, what he has accomplished in his life? All sorts of things you can have just by simply layering on top of this photo thought bubbles or text boxes, and get kids writing, but remaining right in the moment on the particular picture. What is this little girl thinking about as she looks out into this very scary wood, right? Lots of things you could think about to drive characterization. You can also talk about motivation, right? Same concept, but what motivates this athlete to pull this other one across the finish line, right? What motivates these first responder workers to face something like that, the potential of facing that level of danger every day of their life? What's the motivation behind being an athlete and putting yourself in that level of risk and danger simply for enjoyment, right? What makes characters do what they're going to do? You can have a whole sort of conversation, or have kids write and add almost like a brain dump right on top of the paper, or in this case, right on top of the slide.
Good.
Traits and attributes, you know, how many times do we have kids open up a notebook and create a web, and they write about or web out what how a character looks, feels, actions, words that come to mind when you think about the character, physical attributes, right? All of those things. But we usually do that in a web. Here's a different take on that. Okay. So seventh grade, they read Call of the Wilds, but you can apply this to any of the text you're reading or the larger novels you're reading. In this particular case, Buck, for those of you who taught seventh grade, Call of the Wild, Buck is a major character. He's a wolf. So all I did was Google searched, not Google searched, right within this slide, did an image search on buck or a wolf. I forget what I did. Found one I wanted, stretched them out really nice and big on the screen. I then added the backdrop of Alaska, and then went in and pulled out the color of that particular clip art. Took a screenshot of this entire screen and pushed it into the background. And what I want kids to do is, instead of webbing about Buck, maybe they can fill now this hollow silhouette of Buck. So it's a little creative take. And you can layer in some conditions here too. Maybe you can give a condition that the larger the word appears in the silhouette, that particular trait is the most dominant in the novel, or the most dominant in the short story or selected piece, right? And then I can layer on additional things here too. Maybe I could put right on the right-hand side a quick table, which allows the kids to pull 3 of these traits from the silhouette, and then in a column next to it, provide textual evidence that really demonstrates how that trait applies to the main character. So just a different way, more creative way of doing that kind of character work, or webbing and attributes. And you could do that, straight across the board. Some of the images and symbols I pulled from the 6th grade novel of Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, which is a story about, gods and has a lot of heavy Greek mythology. But you can do the same concept. You can either find a clip art and remove the color, or you can find black and white clip art and import that, push it into the background, and kids can write right on top of it. It's just a different creative way of doing it. And if you do all of that in an 8.5 by 11, nice way to print it out in the fall if you're doing this kind of work, then good take on portfolio assignments or bulletin board displays and things like that. But just a different way of doing it. Point of view, we know, is really big on the NJSLA. So exploring point of view and understanding what that is much more beyond first, second, third person, and really getting behind the idea of perspective and point of view. Again, you can push into the background a scene. That lion's point of view is very different than the guests on the other side of that wall of windows. So you can talk about varying points of view in that scene. Or in this scene, the pigeons have very different point of view from what that little boy has right now. One's having a lot of fun, one's flying for their life. So you can talk about all sorts of perspective, point of view there. Or even in a scene like this, where the Peace Corps worker has a very different point of view for his cell phone than from that child from that refugee camp who might not have ever seen a cell phone before. So you can talk about all sorts of point of view, perspective, writing there. And then setting and mood just is a no-brainer here, right? You can give selected scenes and have kids write about the moods that are evoked, or share this out and have kids just almost like a graffiti wall dump on top of this through word art or text words in varying font sizes and colors, the mood that's evoked. And then you can have a full discussion, or they can create a meme, all sorts of creative things here. But the ability to push the scene into the background and never having to worry about it moving as kids interact with it is the drive here. And I just chose quick photos, but there are some amazing photos that you can play with and draw upon when you're talking about setting and just and mood and the moods that are evoked from the scene itself. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this time. That was the end of my presentation. I'm hopefully you guys had an opportunity to layer in some questions if you had them, and Lisa was able to field some responses, and maybe you were able to field some amongst yourselves as well. But hopefully you learned a little something, a little tip or a trick today that'll help provide a solution for some of the things you're trying to do, or maybe amp up a little creativity for the kids or yourself, and maybe you're getting bored with some of the things. A nice way to mix it up a little too. So if you have any other questions at all, you certainly can ask them now. Otherwise, the workshop is over, and hopefully you found it useful. And
Mrs. Bennetti, there was a lot of great feedback in the chat about how wonderful all these ideas are.
Oh, great.
Everybody's inspired.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. We're inspired by you guys. I mean, you guys are in the front lines all the time. So whatever we can do to help you with some ideas or some techie advice, that's what we're here for. So I thank you for that. And I thank you for spending the morning with me ahead of going in to start teaching now. So you are all free to go. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the afternoon eventually when you're out of virtual school, and enjoy the upcoming weekend, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Thank
All
you.
right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Don't leave.
I won't leave.
John,
Yeah.
first of all, I love the presentation, and thank God Lisa is having oh wait, you're still recording, right?
Yeah, you can stop recording now, John.
All right. Hold on.